Okay, so we are live, everyone. Welcome back to another one of our seminar series on open source tools for neurosciences. This is part of an initiative from Open Neuroscience and is being kindly hosted by the Worldwide Series. Together, we have the pleasure of having Professor Aman Saleem speaking with us about BonVision, the project that he's going to talk about it. I don't want to give away too much. You probably already know about it. But I just want to give a brief intro about Professor Saleem, who did his bachelor's in metallurgical engineering material sciences in Bombay, India. And then in 2005, he did a master's in bioengineering with distinction in the Imperial College in London. In 2009, he did a PhD in the lab of Simon Schultz in computational neuroscience in the Imperial College in London as well. And from 2010 to 2016, or in 2009, I'm sorry, he completed his PhD. From 2010 to 2016, he was a postdoc with Matteo Carandini and Kenneth Harris in the Institute of Ophthalmology in the University College London. And since 2017, he's a Sir Henry Dale Fellow and a Principal Research Fellow as an Associate Professor at the Department of Experimental Psychology at the University College London. For those of you who are joining us now on Zoom, just an overview that you can ask questions at any time over the chat. And Professor Saleem said he was happy to basically answer the questions as they came in. So I'm gonna interrupt him in an appropriate moment so that he can answer the questions that you might have, okay? But please don't feel shy to write them. And so the whole point of this is to have like a lively discussion. So we encourage you to ask questions. Professor Saleem, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you everyone for the kind invitation to the Open Neuroscience Forum. I'm really happy about the kind of forum that is set up so we can all share open neuroscience tools and like make science accessible to everyone and make it move forward much faster than what we do alone, trying to reinvent the wheel each time by ourselves. So this is a great initiative and I'm happy to contribute towards it. So today I'm going to be talking about BonVision, which is a software, an open source software that we created in the lab to create and control visual environments. So before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge that this is work. These are the co-authors on this work. It's mainly led by Gonzalo Lopez, who is the person who created and has been maintaining Bonsai in general. So he's helped us develop this. He has developed it with our help, more of it. And this is work jointly with Sam Solomon's lab and my lab at UCL here. And it's been a great joint effort by all the members of the lab. So today I'm just going to go over very briefly what the motivation for us to do to create this new software was. Talk a little bit about BonVision and its key features. So this is mainly an overview of a recent paper that we published. And then I'll spend a bit more time on basically how to get started if you're trying to use BonVision and maybe talk about some new features based on how much time you have. And I'd like to emphasize again that if you do have any questions that you'd like me to clarify, please do feel free to ask them during the talk. And I might point out specific occasions where it might be even better to ask questions. Okay, so as we have been studying vision for many decades now, and well, me just one, but most people for many decades, most of the vision research has been done using classic visual stimuli. And this is including very simple things like direction tuning or tuning curves in general, which are all defined as pixels on a screen. Since then, recently, there's been more work related to using virtual reality systems. And this has really opened up a little bit of research going into navigation-related topics, So kind of bringing in like how animals navigate through a virtual environment rather than just a real environment. And this is related to rendering 3D worlds. And finally, as we move forward, there's more potential of creating augmented reality environments where objects are moving in relation to the animal independently or depending on the animal's position. So you can get quite complex environments. And so when I started my lab around 5 years ago, there was one of the things which most vision neuroscientists face with when they are starting their lab is, okay, what software should I use for the research? Because there's so many softwares available out there, or in general, a lot of people just reinvent and like make their own software, which we also did, but we're hoping to like minimize that in the future. So in terms of what we wanted, the main kind of goals of this software would be to have a single software framework that can generate all these different kinds of stimuli, because previously there's a lot of existing platforms for doing classic visual stimuli, and these are like PsychoPy or Psychophysics Toolbox or Expo, which is Mac-based software, and so on. And then there's softwares that do virtual reality, and these are things specifically based on video games, so so lots of game engines and softwares that have been developed for neuroscience, like Vermin. And then augmented reality is just kind of a growing field. So there's not much out there, but basically there's something called Fremo VR, which is something that can do this, or a rat cave system that can do it. But in general, they're all independent systems. So we'd like a single system that can do this. We'd also like it to be very accessible. So anyone, any lab can pick it up and can use it quite easily. So we want something that's easy to use as well. And one of the key and I think more important thing for us was also easy integration with instrumentation. Because with neuroscience, we are constantly getting new tools. There's a lot of people, something like Open Neuroscience has so many different tools coming out every month that it would be nice to have an easy integration of some of these new tools into our virtual reality or augmented reality systems. So that is something that we wanted to have an easy integration with existing of our software with any new tools that are coming out or even existing systems. So one of the softwares that was already capable of doing a lot of integration and instrumentation, so picking up from various sensors, from cameras, doing video processing online, was Bonsai. And so we wondered, can Bonsai actually be used for this purpose of generating a visual stimulus through there? And that's the point where we got in touch with Gonzalo, who had just started, very recently had started a separate company called NeuroGEARS. And Gonzalo was like, yes, of course we can do it. And so that started the journey of like trying to develop a software where we can do this. So the first challenge in terms of bringing the single framework, easy to use software, was to have a unified framework for both 3D visual stimuli and classic stimuli. So 3D stimuli would allow us to do virtual reality and augmented reality environments, while the classic stimuli is something most vision labs want to continue to study because it's useful and looking at the basic receptive field properties of neurons, or while you're studying vision, that's something we need to be able to have access to. So one of the problems with this is, as I mentioned at the start, 3D stimuli are based on objects in a three-dimensional world, while generally classic stimuli are defined in terms of pixels on a screen or in terms of visual angles. So this is on the elevation axis, you've got stimuli, you've got this checkerboard going different parts of the screen. Now, what we would like is to bring these two into a single framework. And the way we went about doing that was actually take the classic stimuli and project them out onto a three-dimensional sphere. So in this case, we've got a visual angle space here going into this part of the visual of the sphere here. So this is, we use the Mercator projection to be doing this. And once we're in this 3D world, now this has now become quite similar to the 3D stimuli here that we're using. So we can essentially take this stimulus, and it gets warped onto this sphere like this. Once we have this, we can now put screens in OpenGL, just like how we would do for any 3D scene and what most game engines or video games would do. So in this case, we take a circle, and let's say we have a screen like this red screen here, and this would be the display, warped according to what the visual angle should be showing. And if we move the screen away from the subject, which is in the center here, so this green line here, you'll see that you're actually looking at a smaller angle on this part, and so the squares are actually bigger. Similarly, if you change the angle, so you're going again from a similar to this similar red scene, and you change the angle, now this part of the screen should have squares that are smaller and this one bigger, and that's exactly what you see here. So this becomes the rendering of a visual scene becomes quite trivial once you're defining it into a 3D environment. And we can kind of do this quite easily. And actually, to make it even easier for the users, what we went on to do is create, sorry, I'll come back to that. We actually created an automated version of that. But just to show you an example of this in action, here are two stimuli. So we've got a checkerboard that's projected onto a sphere, and we've got these objects placed in a 3D world. This is how they would look on a screen. We've put this grating here also as a reference. So you'll see that there is a little bit of warping, and that's because you're taking this is how a visual angle would be defined when you take when you define things in terms of degrees of visual space. You would need to warp the image slightly. And this is the same kind of configuration, but instead of putting a 2D stimulus, we're putting a three-dimensional objects. So this is an example on 2 LCD monitors. This is an example on putting it onto a head-mounted display for human subjects. It's exactly the same code in front. All you're changing is the display here. And again, we're able to generate this because the screens are much closer to the eye. In this case, you're getting a lot more warping compared to this one. That's because the screen has moved closer. And finally, we can also go on. So this is a rig in the lab where we've got a dome projection system that's surrounding a mouse, and you can see that we can also warp onto the whole sphere. So as I mentioned, to make it easier for the user, we've actually created an auto calibration method in which you take a marker. You actually just have to print out this marker, which is something called an Aruco marker, and these are markers that allow you to. It's like a QR code that allows you to get the unique 3D position of the surface on which the marker is placed. So you can use that, putting it in the position where the subject or the animal would be, and then the BonVision generates a stimulus to place the Aruco code for the screen, and then appropriately gets the 3D position of the subject and the screen and gets their relative angle to generate the appropriate visual scene. Now, this was a laptop screen. These were images taken during the COVID time, so everything was not in the lab, but at home. And that's why you see laptops and manipulations on laptops. So when you move the screen, when you straighten this laptop screen, now the relative distance between these two has changed. And we've actually moved the marker to the right slightly, if you see that. And so you can see that now the grating and the checkerboard pattern have all shifted according to where the position of the according to where this scene warped according to where the relative position of the screen is with the animal. Note that in this case, the grating is actually defined. So the scene is defined in terms of relative to the animal, so or the subject. So because the marker is moved to because we've moved the subject to the right here, the grating has moved along with the subject to the right, and the scene is warped accordingly to make sure everything else is the visual angle on the observer's end is maintained constant. So not only, so these are all examples of it being used just to, create environments and so on. Does it actually work in real life situations? So here are some demo experiments that we ran in the lab. So this is an experiment where we just did a very simple behavior. This is something where if you presented a dot that is slowly drifting above an animal, the animal tends to freeze rather than flee. So this is an example where we projected overhead, and this was a standard stimulus that we were using previously using PsychPhys Toolbox. And when we ran this using BonVision, it replicated the same result. Similarly, this is an example of using sparse noise to characterize receptive fields of a visual neuron or visual neurons. This is the local field potential recorded in the superior colliculus, and this is spiking activity in V1. And both of them were able to do the whole thing where we presented stimulus using BonVision, analyze the neural responses, and then generate what the receptive field map should look like based on the activity, the neural activity. So we're able to go all the way around. Here's an example of mouse and virtual reality environment. For this, we created a platform. So it's just a flat surface on which the animal was running. So the speed of the platform was linked to the animal's speed. And we just had the animal just run through this and just observed the behavior. And interestingly, the first day, so this lightest gray line here, the animal doesn't run much. It starts increasing its speed, but also as it starts increasing, as you go across days, it starts creating a speed profile. So it speeds up when it's on the platform, and as it reaches the end of the platform, it kind of slows down. So it's kind of like it is getting this immersive feeling of like it is experiencing an environment. If it was blind or if it did not experience this immersivity, it should just be a straight line. It should just be running through the environment, irrespective of the position in the room. So if you look at the run speed across training days, at the early part of the platforms around this red region, you see that the speed is increasing across days. But then at the end of the platform, the speed increases a little bit, but actually it stays pretty low. So there is this profile of starting off slow, speeding up, and then slowing down again. And finally, it's also possible to run this in human subjects. So this is on a head-mounted HTC Vive system. And we did so our intention here was not to do a new psychophysics task, but just to demonstrate that human psychophysics is also possible in this. So we had subjects differentiate. So these are two boxes placed at different depths, and you can move your head around to see whether how the boxes move relative to each other. And the idea is to say which box is bigger. So for example, actually these two boxes might be the same size because they're the appropriate depth away from each other, while these objects in 2D, while they look like they're the same size, actually in 3D, they might be placed one in front of the other. So actually the box behind might be bigger. So that's something we needed to ask the subjects to assess which box is bigger. And they're very, very good at doing this. It's not a new discovery that subjects are able to do it, but we're able to use BonVision to generate this behavior. One of the things that I mentioned, which is we're able to update the scene based on, we're able to rotate the screen and move the screen. You saw the automated screen calibration. We can actually do that online as well. So the observer itself doesn't have to be in a fixed position. And this is very early on, a video we made. In this case, it's actually this red cup that I'm holding. We're using Bonsai to just look at the image and process the image. And it was a bit of a cheat, but I was holding a red cup in front of a blue Jack t-shirt. So it was a bit easier for the video processing using Bonsai to do that. But the main thing is we're updating the scene on the screen based on the position of the cup in the room. And we used the 3D position of the cup. So that's just an example. So why is the scene need to update like that? So conceptually, it's something where if the subject is here versus if the subject is here, the scene that would be presented for a tree that's outside actually would be very different. So if the subject is close to a window, so if you're close to a window, you can look out of the window and you see if you see a tree, it's probably subtending a particular angle on the window. Now, if you move far away from the window, the tree is going to get bigger on the window itself, while the size of the tree remains the same, but the relative size on the window is going to increase. So as the subject is moving around, you can actually get a different perspective. And this is just talking about size. There's also, if there's two objects, you might see a different relationship where one object goes behind the other and so on. So to demonstrate this, so the scene depends on the animal's viewpoint and so the animal's position. And to create an augmented reality, we can actually use, so Bonsai has recently got this new feature where you can actually calculate the animal's position based on deep learning networks such as DeepLabCut. So we can now use DeepLabCut to update, to know what the position of the animal is, and then update the scene on the screens based on that. And this is an example here. Before I show you the video, just to talk you through it, this was a video that was kindly given to us by Bruno and
Sorry,
yeah.
I just have a quick question, because from like some experience, like DeepLabCut, it is a little bit resource intensive. Like how, what kind of setups do you need to have like these things running smoothly and so on?
So, well, first of all, like you don't necessarily need DeepLabCut to do this. So as I showed in this one here, you can use very basic Bonsai video processing, which is relatively lower intensive in terms of the resources. In terms of DeepLabCut, what we're running here is just the inference model. We're not actually training the data online. So in that way, you will still need a GPU to process the information, but it's not, so you can run this online using quite a simple, like we tested it at 40 Hertz. We were running it at 40 Hertz on not like a crazy GPU, like maybe 5 years ago, it was a good GPU, that kind of thing. So nowadays you'll get, it wouldn't be a very high requirement. And using MobileNet or some of the more recent networks, you might be able to even optimize that. So you do need a GPU, but I don't think you need a very high spec GPU to run the inference on this.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, so we got these videos, and we then, again, COVID time, so we just did the best we could with the available resources. So we got these pre-trained, actually they were pre-trained on DeepLabCut already, and we just simulated this room based on the geometry of the room in the video, and we put a virtual scene that's sitting outside the animal. So this is the virtual scene. It's a Skyview scene that you could download online. And based on, so the red dot here shows the position of the animal, and the 3 screens show what would be the scene on these 3 scenes if this was the scene outside the room. So just to show you what that looks like. So you can see the animals. So this is the head position, the red dot, and the red dot is what is going to come up later. So as the animal is moving around, the scene on this is actually updating. And this can happen in real time with, so depending on the position of the animal, we're updating the scene that is being presented on the screens. Okay, so just a quick overview. BonVision is an open source visual environment generator where we're able to present both 2D and 3D stimuli. And once you get into it and start building stimuli, it's actually quite easy for both of them. They come as a unified framework, so you don't really have to switch between the two too much. The cost, it's quite straightforward to stay within the same software. Especially, you're able to have the display environment as a separate thing, so you can define all your stimuli, 2D or 3D in one part, and then define the stimuli, and then move to a different rig, and all you have to change is the display. So you can actually quite easily exchange stimuli between different rigs. We're able to precisely control even the scene, even with a moving observer, and it can be used for all kinds of stimuli. We keep trying to create new stimuli, and it's been really fun. I'd be interested if there's some new stimuli that you're struggling with that we can try and help out with. One thing that came about not necessarily by design, but well, partly by design, it's actually really easy to replicate experiments now. You saw that there were two different setups in the lab, one with 2 screens, we have one with 3 screens, and then a dome. And with BonVision, like, we are able to take the same stimulus and just move it across rigs very easily. And in fact, it's one of the attractiveness of BonVision. It's the most attractive feature that makes it attractive to labs where you really need replication. So IBL or Allen Institute have been taking this up also for the same reason, because it makes replication really easy. And finally, it's naturally closed loop, and I'll show you an example of that in the demo. And it's really easy to interface with different I/O systems. So this might be a good point if somebody wants to ask questions before I move on to just kind of some tools available and how to get started with BonVision, and then I'll show some demos. So if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them now. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm just going to keep going.
Sorry, there is a question on the chat, and the question is, what kind of projector should be used for the experiments?
This really depends on your animal model. So for example, if you're using flies, you want to have a really high speed, high refresh rate projector, and quite specialist actually. With mice, we use an LED projector, and the reason for that is because the usual lamp projectors, their light level keeps changing as they age, and so we want to minimize the calibration that needs to be done for making sure the scene is presented appropriately. So we need to gamma calibrate the projectors in general, and we wanted a projector that's stable. I'm happy to share actually the details of the projector we've used are on the BonVision paper. It should be. So you can check them out. It's a Casio projector, but in general, any LED-based projector should be fine. The refresh rates, we use a 60 Hertz projector in general, which seem to be fine for mouse vision. Okay, so if you're interested in BonVision, how do you get started with it? Oops, sorry. So the resources that we have available, the first thing I would suggest is check out the website, because we try whenever possible to put everything on the website. So this is So this is how the website looks. You've got a lot of features, and I think what we've spent a bit of effort is trying to get this getting started section up and going. So you've got your installation instructions. The next 3 sections here, the basic workflow, display environment, and stimulus generation, are a bit of conceptually how we generate stimuli and how a BonVision script would be. And then I think from basic stimulus onwards, you start seeing how to generate a very simple stimulus, a step-by-step walk through generating your first stimulus, and so on. And generating a series of stimuli, how you log information related to stimuli, and so on. We also have a bunch of demos. So this is creating an augmented reality, or actually gamma calibration is something I mentioned that you would need to do for any screen for vision experiments. And we have a lot of text explaining why we need to do it, how you would do it in BonVision. And this honestly should hopefully be useful, even if you're not using BonVision, to use in general. It's the same thing for mesh mapping. We've got a lot of information about how you would create a mesh map and use it. I'm going to talk about mesh map a little bit more in the demos later. We've got some new features on that, so I'll talk about that soon. We also have some information about the individual nodes that are being used. So, so what the nodes are and how you would use them, so what the inputs would be and so on. This is not very complete. You might all be aware documentation is really hard to keep up and maintain, but we're trying our best. So if there's something that's unclear, please get in touch, and we'll be happy to update things and so on. The other tools, so you've got getting started, documentation, and examples and demos. The other thing we've tried out, which I'd really be curious to know if people find it useful. We've got a YouTube channel. The best way to get to it is probably by clicking on the link here, which has got a bunch of videos. And so the first thing, if you're starting off, you've got some BonVision quick tip videos, which are very short, less than 10 minutes, each of them, just talking about how do you do your first BonVision stim. Sorry, you're going to see ads now. But how to generate your first BonVision stimulus. What are the first things? How best to use a create window node that's there, and so on. We also have live sessions. So we've run 2 of them so far, and as soon as there's a topic that we get a lot of questions on, so this is how they've gone on so far. So if we notice that there's a lot of questions coming on a certain topic, we'll try and create a live session on that, and then have people join in on there, and then we'll put the video online. So we've had it on 2 topics. One was generating a 3D scene, and that's something I'll show you later as well. And also there was one on just generating a closed loop stimulus, looming and stimulus, and so on. And yeah, if you have any other videos, for example, this talk, they're going to go onto this channel. The other tool that you have, if you're ever stuck or if you want to know more, there's the Bonsai forums. Those of you who use Bonsai, you might be very familiar. There's one. So there's, I think Liad is on this call. So there was a question about this, and then we tried to, and someone or the other, it doesn't have to be one of us, would try and get the answer. So ideally, it would become a community thing where everyone's answering questions as and when they get time. For now, we're going to try and answer as many as possible by ourselves, as long as we have the resources to be able to do so. So the other thing is Bonsai forums. So there's a lot of previous questions. So if you search for your query, you might be able to find the necessary queries that might give you your answer, or you can feel free to ask new questions. There's always new people coming in, and it's great to have a larger community there. It's quite an active forum. So some more exciting things. Here's some new features. Okay. So one thing I'm going to show you is how you load 3D models, and maybe we can go over a couple of other topics while doing that as well. So the first thing is the nice thing, this was a relatively recent addition. We're able to just download a freely available model. In this case, we're going to take Iron Man, but so just to show you, this is like this free3d.com. We got this model off of there. I just hit download and I got an OBJ file. And I'm just going to show you. So this is something I'm just going to demo now. Yeah. So it's a very simple workflow in Bonsai that we're using to create this. So this is where we're defining the background color and so on. And then in the scene resources, I just basically point to this file. So I'm just going to say all files, find the object file, and that's it. And now in the drawn scene model, I just say, okay, I want to show Iron Man. And there you go. That's something that we've just downloaded from the internet and then just put into Bonsai, and we're able to generate this. Now we can actually look at this from different perspectives, scale it in different ways, and so on. So maybe something I'll show you now is also how easy it is to just kind of animate some of these things. So let's say we want to rotate. So I'll just show you that again. So let's say you just want to do this, you want to rotate it at a certain speed, like constantly. How would we do that? So first thing I do is I want to take the rotation Y, and I want to manipulate that. Now we've generated something called range animation. Some of these things are, so I'll say rotated for 5 seconds from -180 to 180. So you do a full circle. And this is current, so this is in degrees, so we want to convert it to radians. So that's just degrees to radian. And then I just connect that up and then run that. And that's just rotating this scene. Oh, so that was just one rotation. Now, if you want to keep having it keep rotating, I'm just going to stop that and say complete. And that should just keep going over and over. Okay, so that's just, as you can see, it's actually quite, well, I have done this a lot, so it's a bit easier for me, but it is quite straightforward to kind of animate some features quite easily. If we now instead want to do a closed loop something, so let's say, I'm going to change that. So let's say, let's rotate them. So let's say we want to move the position of this one based on where the mouse is, which is something that it's a closed loop kind of situation. So I'll get, so this is the advantage of Bonsai. It has a lot of features that are already existing in it. So I'll say X position, and then I externalize this to translation X. Oops, got to do this. So the range is off. That's why we're not seeing it. All right. I've done this just before, just in case I save that. think I know what's happening. Zoom has changed the Zoom has changed my coordinates somehow. I don't know why.
Live demos, always a
Yeah,
surprise.
always a problem. Okay, I'm gonna skip this, but basically it's the problem is just that it needs to be rescaled. I think that this does it. Let's try. It's really high number. It's yeah, I don't know why the numbers have become crazy. These are I'm gonna skip it in the interest of time, but yeah, we should be able to just, if you can rescale it, it's something you can actually just control straight away. Okay, so that was something about loading a 3D model into BonVision. The other thing you can do is, this is a recent feature, is the most recent update actually, is you can have an array of 3D models. So that's an example here. So in this case, rather than having just one object, we're going to have a whole host of objects, and we can control the position or any feature of these objects based on any. We can generate a different array of features. So in this case, we're changing the position of these cubes based on a Brownian motion. And so, for example, I can also just rotate these cubes. But this was a feature that we generated because there was there was a bit of interest in generating like a field of dots or something where there's multiple objects, but we don't have to control, but you don't want to generate each object individually because that takes a lot of graphics GPU power. Instead, this is something that optimizes it by generating them all together. So it's more of something that's under the hood. That's an improvement rather than something that we would have been able to do this before, but it would have been much more complicated to generate a workflow to be able to do that. Another feature that's under the hood, but it's something that really solves a lot of problems going forward, and we're quite excited about that, is mesh mapping, which we've recently changed. So in general, and things that I've shown you before, which are on a curved screen, let's say we have a curved screen here, and we have the observer here. The general principle by which we do mesh mapping is that OpenGL, by default, generates flat screens, or there's a lot of, you project a scene. You can put the screen wherever you want in this 3D world. You can move it further or closer away, but usually it's a rectangular or a square flat screen. So what we then do is create a virtual screen that is behind or in front or wherever, and then we kind of draw lines from the observer onto the screen to figure out what is the corresponding image that should be. So we generate the scene on the virtual screen, and then we take a pixel there and map it onto a pixel here. And so we're trying to warp the image. We take a 2D image and we warp it onto a curved screen. And this is what most of visual neuroscience uses in general. And like even Psych Physics Toolbox has options to do this. And this is how we were doing it. But now Gonzalo has come up with this new trick, which is really exciting, which is because we've got a 3D scene already, rather than having to go to the virtual screen and then back again, we're actually, for each dot, we find out what is the actual visual angle of that dot, and we just find out what is the scene that should be generated on that. So we skip the point of going to the virtual screen and coming back. And what that helps with is the resolution. So in this case, as you can see, the lines are not symmetric. So the distance between the lines, I kept the distance between these segments the same, but the distance between the lines on the screen are not the same. So the resolution is very different based on whether you're close to the edge of the screen or in the center of the screen. And this now would create like a more symmetric, at least your warping is not is symmetric. So, you won't have this asymmetric warping. So that's what it helps with. And basically that is it from me. I just wanted to talk about these 3 new things. There's a bunch of new things that we will cover. Follow our Twitter account and our live coding sessions, and you should be able to see some new features. We have a news feed section on the website. We haven't really sent out many messages because there's not enough people, and also it's something that we will have regular updates once we get into a rhythm of that. And finally, just to thank again Gonzalo, who is the developer of all of this, and all the other co-authors on this study. And finally, Bonsai Forum and the open science community, it's been really fun to work with because everyone's very open with everything. So we're able to share resources. The videos we got to be able to generate to demonstrate the augmented reality was thanks to this. And finally, the funders. So we've been funded by the Wellcome Trust's Open Research Fund, and also these other funders. Basically, all our resources bit of all of our resources went into developing BonVision. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. If there are questions, people can ask them in the chat, or actually just unmute themselves to ask them if they want. I think if you don't mind, I would like to kick off with a small question, which is you showed some demos, and I know that Bonsai has this library package where you kind of like can download like already made like little solutions, right? Are you sharing all of these BonVision demos in there as well, or is it on the website? Like if people just want to download what you showed and play around with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you go to the BonVision website, and actually it's not linked from here, but any of the demos, it links to the demo package, which is a GitHub page with, so this is the BonVision GitHub page in general, and you've got examples, which has all the demos that we have, and we try and upload more demos here. So that's another very useful resource if you want to just try different examples. Benchmarks is something that we have some different benchmarks. This was something that was in the paper, but it's also something that you can run for yourself just to know how your system is doing. So there'll be more information on the benchmarks in the eLife paper. And yeah, you wouldn't have to go through this unless you want to look at the source code, but in general, you can just go through the Bonsai package, the package on Bonsai, but the examples are here. So you can just, this repo has all the information that you might.
Okay, cool. That's great. So we have a question from Josian. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right. Could you explain the difference between scene model versus textured model, and how we should choose to draw 3D models in a virtual environment?
Okay, right. So, so first, if you choose draw model, so here you already have like plane. You can also put, so these are usually models where, actually, I think the other, so this model array, for example, anyway, so draw model is a place where you just have this is not associated with any texture, so it's just a flat, whatever light model you choose, that's going to be displayed. while a draw textured model is something where you can place it, you can bind a texture to it. So you can put a different texture. So in this case, there's draw model has got a plane, but there's no, you'll notice that there's no texture there. So instead, if I say draw textured model, now you're able to, so this is the mesh name, should have, and you should be able to bind a texture to this so you load the texture up in scene resources. You would, sorry, it's not in scene resources, it's in texture resources. So you put the texture in there. You can put, you can just drag and drop textures in there. And then you'll be able to just draw that onto the textured model. So if you have a plane there, you can bind it to, you can bind the texture to that draw textured model. Scene model instead is something where, like in this case where we have this Iron Man, we have a complex scene which has a lot of different features. So these are just like, if you created this, so for example, if you're in Blender and you've created a scene, you've created a whole virtual reality environment, that is actually a scene rather than an object. So within the scene, you might have individual objects. So for example, you have a, you have like what I was showing you before. Sorry, just a basic case where these are individual models. So we just took each of these objects. So these are, this was just a draw model. We just put a different color on them. We just took each of these objects and we placed them in the 3D world using BonVision, using the X, Y, Z coordinates in BonVision. Instead, if you take the scene, you can have a scene that already has these objects. And actually you will be, depending on how you generate the scene, you should be able to control the position of the objects after they're already in, but then you get the whole scene in. And that's what scene model does. And texture model is something where you can put a texture on top of that, and that's, so those are the differences between the three. All of these are based on the async package, which says you're able to import various different models based on whatever that package. So that package is usually updated. So when that package gets updated with new models, BonVision should be able to upload newer scene types. Hopefully we should be able to in the future do animations as well. So if somebody has like an animation of Iron Man doing some actual action of the hand, we might be able to import that. So as soon as so that is technically possible, but we haven't really like, we could do it just because it's cool, but I'm not sure it's really used for neuroscience at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope this answers the question, and this actually brings me to another question, which is, and this is, I think, more for bonsai in general, right? So you've been working both with a lot of these open source packages and integrating them into bonsai. And for BonVision, you just mentioned one. Are you also like kind of like working back and contributing things back to these packages that you're using? How has the interaction with these other packages been in these other communities, right? Because our interest in open neuroscience is always to know a lot about also the human aspect of the open source project. So if you don't mind. Yeah.
So this is, it's been super smooth because Gonzalo is the one developing BonVision. And so basically, I think he's been great. He's here. He might be able to comment as well on that. But he's been great in terms of like when there is, and also in terms of separating out what's BonVision and what's bonsai, because BonVision is based on the shaders package of bonsai. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the updates to be able to generate various things in BonVision, Gonzalo has had to update the shaders aspects in bonsai. And so that way it's gone back to bonsai. And I think as with most softwares, as you try testing various things, you find bugs in the basic thing. And so there's a lot of like development going back and forth that way as well. So that's been one thing. And I think the other thing that has been just in terms of like having a unique application has been useful in just chatting about like, directions in which bonsai or uh, other aspects of it might go. So for example, with, I think there was a point where Deep Lab Cut started, um, you know, they started having conversations with Gonzalo about using bonsai, like running the inference in bonsai, and that really helped with BonVision. So it kind of went really well with 3 different open source software packages. So that's a nice interaction, and yeah, we're quite open to doing that. I think one thing that I'm quite curious about is what's the best way to spread the knowledge. And so we've got this forum, and we're trying these YouTube videos. We'll see how the response is to those, just in terms of trying to get some quick, easy learning tools and so on.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to compliment, because Gonzalo also wrote a little bit here in the chat, more on the topic of like the tools that bonsai are based on, right? He's saying like at various times there were contributions from the people developing bonsai and him, like submitting pull requests to these packages that are dependencies, such as Rx and expression scripting, and SVG loading package, and so on. Right. So he's basically saying the policy is to not to just fix for bonsai, but actually fix before it gets to bonsai, so to say, right? So that everybody benefits, and then everybody benefits from the fix. And then we have another question, which is more of a request, I guess, from Jocelyn, which is, could we have a demo of loading correct resources, mesh, texture, and shader with corresponding file types to draw a complex model like Iron Man in the future? Right, so he's actually requesting.
Yeah, we'll do that. By the way, one thing I can point you to in terms of that is this live coding session. The 22nd December one is actually a lot. It's actually quite a long session. It's an hour-long session where we actually discussed different models, 3D models, and how to load them and so on. So that might be a good start. I think so we did not have the related scenes on the examples folder, but that's something we can add on as well.
Okay, cool. I think that's a wonderful resource, having like a live coding session. I think that's a nice format. I mean, you said you've run a couple of those, right?
Yeah, we ran 2, and then we were going to do a third one. Yeah, we've just been, things caught up, but hopefully we'll run a few more in the near future. I think it's kind of cycling between more development and then coming back to dissemination. So we've been in a bit of a development phase lately. So I think we're going to get back to dissemination, and that'll change it.
Yeah. Okay, so Jocelyn is saying thank you for your answer, and Nanjijin Nick is asking, is it possible to change contrast and brightness?
Simple answer is yes. It depends on the stimulus. Some of the stimuli have like explicitly say like contrast, so you can actually change it there. Brightness is something is also something you can change, but you'll have to change individual channels. That is something you'll have to do manually. I don't think we have an automated option for that. And yeah, those are usually physical limitations of the display as well. So you have to think about those aspects a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is it possible to adjust the duration of the images or movies? So now the questions are coming in.
Yeah. Yes, actually, we did. So there is, I think, I don't think we have. So I don't think we did a live coding session on images, but I think it's definitely worth doing one. So that's something we should be doing, because we do have quite a lot of support for videos and images, image sequences, and so on. So it would be something that I think we should plan for a live coding session for about images in movies. But if I so just to docs. We haven't updated this. I can update that, but there's we definitely spend quite a bit of time on image resources, so we'll do a live coding session on that sometime.
Okay, great. So there is another question from Pradeep. Incorporating animated moving objects sounds cool. For example, using eye movements of mice can be used to modulate the animations in real time. Is this planned sometime in the future?
So this can already be done. This is not something that's we can already move objects around. What I was referring to is actually like within an object, there might be physical relationships. So in terms of you can move like a sphere around based on an animal's movements, all the demos that I showed and so on. What I was referring to is more like animating an arm of a model, which is more complex a movement because they're all interlinked with each other. There's maybe 100 different models within that model. So it's something that we can't, that is something we can't do, but definitely closed loop modulation of animating objects is something we can already do.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions coming. So if anybody has pressing one, maybe now or forever hold your peace. And if that is not the case, I would like to thank you again for your talk and for your time. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and asking questions. Gonzalo also for helping with some of the questions on the chat on the background. And also for developing a lot of these, as Aman is saying. So yeah, thank you very much. And with this, I would like to say bye-bye to everyone, and we're going to close the YouTube room in just a little bit, and eventually this Zoom room as well. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so we are now offline on YouTube.